Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, the podcast where conversations about wealth go deeper. This isn't about flashy success or one-size-fits-all advice. It's about real people designing financial lives that align with who they are, what they value, and the legacies they're building. We bring together voices from business, finance, law, and leadership to talk about the moments that shape them and the strategies that sustain them. Here is your host, Chris Everett.
Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, where money meets meaning and purpose. So today I'm reconnecting with someone that I haven't spoken with in over a decade. Well, except for preparing for this show. So his journey is remarkable. From fundraising at Concordia University to leading grant making at Wheat Ridge Ministries for over 10 years. And now he's running his own consulting practice that focuses on helping nonprofits and ministries discover their secret sauce. So, what makes him unique isn't just his expertise in organizational culture and strategic planning, but it's his willingness to go beyond the surface numbers, which I like a lot, to find where the real life and energy exists in an organization. It's powerful work. So, you'll hear him talk about everything from helping a toxic faith based client transform itself to his personal journey of financial stewardship with his wife, moving from 10% giving to somewhere between 15 and 20% over 25 years. And he's someone who believes that a healthy culture never happens by accident. And the most powerful ministries are born out of deep pain, meeting passionate purpose. So we'll explore his above the line, below the line philosophy, his work with family and business transitions, and why he thinks fear based leadership is killing organizational potential. Plus, you'll get insights from his book, Tender Lions, about father son relationships and why those connections ripple out to impact entire societies. And with all that, please help me welcome today's guest, Brian Becker, founder of Leaders Edge. Brian, welcome to Beyond the Numbers.
Well, thank you, Chris. It has been 10 years or maybe more since we've been in the same room together. So I'm really, really looking forward to just having a good conversation with you for the next hour or so. Thanks to all the people that tune in and listen to you. I've known you for 20 plus years, and every conversation we've ever had has been interesting, deep, meaningful, sometimes very spirit filled. And so I just really appreciate that. So thanks. Thanks very much.
Me too. I appreciate that about you as well. So, Brian, yes, it's been over a decade, but don't we look the same, right? So, take me back to when we first knew each other through the Oak Park River Forest business community and walk us through this journey from Concordia to Wheat Ridge, now to running Leaders Edge. What's been the most unexpected turn along the way?
Well, there's two things that come to mind. One is I uh, I was self-employed back in the 90s, and out of nowhere, completely unexpected, I got a call from somebody at the university to say, your name was given to us as somebody that we think could be really effective in the senior leadership of the whole fundraising advancement department. And I I had no experience in that. And that was from a friend of a friend, which so often happens. And that put me on a path that I never would have anticipated, but has been amazingly meaningful.
Well, that says a
And
lot too. I mean, you had no experience in that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it put me in an environment, the fundraising and friend raising and environment that just really aligned with my love of people, my values around being in service to the larger community, putting my faith into action. And so before I was self-employed in the corporate world, primarily consulting and training in that, which was good, but it just opened up a whole new world for me. I, after being there at Concordia University for about 7 years or so, I learned of another organization I really didn't know a lot about called Wheat Ridge Ministries, and They had a new president who was looking to fill his old spot, and after 3 or 4 long conversations, I just felt like I was being called to take on a new adventure. I'd never worked in the foundation world before. I went into there as a vice president and then senior vice president around how they make their grants,
So
who they.
different from what you had just been trained to do, right?
Yeah, so I was in the asking world, and
Mhm.
then I went into the giving world, and, uh, again, very interesting. Felt like I was really in my lane. I was there for more than a decade, um, and never had more fun, more challenging. Worked hard. We laughed a lot. Very creative environment. And then um, we got a new president, and he and I were not aligned on direction and values, and that and so, I knew in my head that it was time for me to leave, and he did too, and so, I got laid off for the first time in my life, which was really interesting, experience. Um, after some real soul searching, I decided that I did not want to be in the leadership of a large organization. I really wanted to use those experiences to help other leaders lead more effectively.
Well, and truly, when one door closes, right, another one opens. But I am always, kind of lean into scripture, and all things, whether they look good or bad, work together for our good when we love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. So it was just a matter of you just stepping into the new phase.
Yeah, and I think being willing to, uh, take a risk and jump out there, and I've been blessed to have a wife of 42 years who has allowed me. It's not like she was gonna, it's like, "You can't do that." No, I mean, really, really good conversations and very supportive of me taking those risks. And We lived in that community. My wife taught at Oak Park River Forest High School almost her entire career. So, I mean, so we were living right where you have lived for almost all of your life. Yet my work took me all over the country. And then when I was with the foundation, I was in South America and the Middle East and Canada and so I mean, I really had a life that just went way beyond, the little farm boy who grew up in Southern Illinois, you know? What a worldview, sometimes like, wow, changing views on things, so and I'm still just really, really having a blast at my work now.
Still a farm boy.
Yeah, in many ways I am, and find real meaning and application in, the seasons and the work of farming, how the grain, um, you have to set some aside, it becomes dead, you put it in the ground, it comes back to new life. That's as a Christian, that's all about how baptism works, and I see that coming. I didn't think about that as a 16-year-old. I don't know any 16-year-old thinks about that, but now it's actually I really kinda I long to go back there at times. Actually, I did go back a couple weeks ago and spend some time on the farm, so.
Yeah. So when we had talked earlier, you'd mentioned that effective nonprofits and ministries are not born casually, right? They come from someone's deep pain and it meets their passionate purpose. Can you paint that picture for us? And what does that look like when you're consulting with an organization?
Well, on the where the pain meets the passion part of it, I'll give you a really practical example. Many years ago, there were a really effective network of congregations called PADS in the
Oh, I
western suburbs,
remember them. Yeah.
and they were like, "Look, we live in affluence, and there's a hidden homelessness problem right down the street from us." And so, one of my favorite devotional writers, Frederick Buechner, is also a professor. He's passed away now, but said that the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness, my gladness, meets the world's deep hunger. And that's where we're being called. And I feel blessed that those passions of mine, those values of mine, found that, or, God's plan and calling and all that came together to put that together. Well, with pads, they had people that they were all volunteers, okay, and they formed this really effective network, and out of that was born Housing Forward, which is now one of the most effective organizations, maybe in the United States, at helping homeless people find their way into transitional housing with all kinds of supportive services around them. And while that takes an immense amount of grit and creativity and resources, at the end of that day, you think, wow, that's a lot of investment. At the end of the day, if we can help walk along someone who's homeless and get them into transitional and then permanent housing and work and that, what a blessing for them. But it actually relieves the financial burden on society when it's done in a way that's effective like that. So it's this mix of head and heart, you know, the where that I mean, that place was born out of a lot of pain where people could see that and say, "We have to do something about that," and willing to take risk and invest a lot of time and energy and really upset the community in some ways too.
Well, sure. I mean, anytime you want to make a change and really bring progress to a community, somebody's going to not like it. There's going to be some part of it that tips the card. But like you said, it's so transformative. And I, I haven't looked at the foundation over there for a while. I don't know what their funding looks like. But I do know that they are making a huge impact. And I am so grateful for what they do. And because they do it in such a giving, open-handed way, it has to help their fundraising.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I was blessed, maybe 4 years ago, their executive director somehow found their way to me, and I facilitated their board's last strategic plan. And so that was just I lived in that community for over 40 years and, saw the positive effects of that, and then when I got contacted there to work with them, it's just really, great leadership, great board. They still have in that board of directors, they still have that. I mentioned this 2 minutes ago. We live in this affluent community and have this hidden homelessness. We even have high school students that are homeless. We That's unacceptable. We have to do something more. We have to do something better about that. And that's that, the deep hunger and the deep gladness coming together. And that's the part of that secret sauce of how we solve big, sometimes seemingly intractable problems in society.
So well said.
Thank you.
So this show is called Beyond the Numbers. So I have to ask you, as you work with organizations focused on traditional metrics like attendance and donations, which we just sort of touched on, but what are the numbers that actually tell you if a ministry or a nonprofit is healthy and impactful?
Well, the numbers, for example, let's just stay with Housing Forward as an
Mhm.
example.
Is Linda still running it?
Linda Schuler, yeah,
That's amazing.
remarkable executive director.
Remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah, talk about grit and passion and smart and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, what a combination of needed leadership. So, um, which we can talk about a little bit later if you'd like. But the numbers, okay? So I know that they're a savvy organization, and all organizations could model themselves on this. They know how many people they serve. They can tell you how many people they serve and how they're serving them, and which of those programmatic elements actually help educate and lift the person out of poverty and into transitional housing. So those kinds of numbers are essential to prove to the community that what you're doing is worthwhile. It also gives you a very powerful story to tell to your donor or the state of Illinois who might have funding available, or a family foundation who cares about the west side of Chicago or the suburbs. So those kinds of numbers are vital. Numbers also tell you on the fundraising side, where's the money coming from? And then you have to be able to divide that out and say, "Oh, these are the impact points. These are the inflection points in our organization where this is what's giving us life." That's part of that secret sauce. It can also help you say, "Oh, we're putting a lot of effort, time, money into this, but we're not getting much impact out of that. Maybe we need to do less so we can do more at the core of this. So those numbers also tell you if you're growing in some areas and declining in other areas in terms of fundraising, or what kinds of events or mailings or social media is actually bringing people closer to you. Um, the really savvy organizations that I've worked with, they even have really careful um, metrics around, like, how much does the board give, and who's coming on the board in the future, paying attention to things like that. So that's all. It's not complicated to do, but you have to dedicate either board time or staff time to putting some simple metrics into place, so you know what's hitting the target, what's helping you have impact, and what's missing and you should cut loose of.
It's not really that different from business.
No, no. And for some reason, we call it nonprofit, and people think that because it's nonprofit, then they should not have any margin. When in fact, uh, when you look at what nonprofits do in the country around homelessness, hunger, children, gangs, broken families, health, immigration, refugee. I mean, just go down the education. Universities, hospitals. Many of them are almost all of them are nonprofit, and so how they sustain themselves gives them um, power to address those community needs.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, and they're worth investing in from my perspective.
So, staying with, or maybe morphing a little bit to culture and transformation, you've said that culture eats strategy for lunch, and that healthy culture never happens by accident. You tell us about faith-based client in the Midwest. What did you walk into, and how do you diagnose when an organization's culture is happening by accident versus intentionally?
That's a great question, and let's talk about that for the next 3 hours.
Yeah, yeah, I know it was a big deal.
Okay, so in a nutshell, in 2023, I started working with a Midwest seminary that, when you look at the website and you see their values, their programming, their mission, you're like, wow, that's really motivational. They are equipping lay leaders and clergy to serve the church and serve the world in important ways. And then I got there and I started interviewing in more depth the leadership team and some of the faculty and staff leaders, and realized that all of that lived out values was only on the website. There was an immense amount of mis there was an immense lack of trust between faculty and staff, faculty and leadership team, faculty and the board of directors,
So it sounds
for
just
good
like,
reasons.
I mean, right there, to me, that sounds like poor hiring decisions.
Um, uh, I believe many of these people were marvelous, caring Christian people, and they had had so much turnover in the upper leadership of that organization that people didn't know what they should expect, and this all unloaded during COVID. So that in and of itself had a big culture smashing effect, because people who used to be together every day didn't see each other for months at a time. And so professors are teaching in their living room or their kitchen or in their car, and there's turnover above them. So who's my boss and who's the president? And then there's this riff with the board. And so instead of, you know, 15 years ago, that organization looked like everybody had their oars in the water pulling in the same direction. And then it looked like a few of the people had their oars in the water, but most people had peeled off and just doing their own thing. And so, and these are not bad people. These are good people who care and people of faith. But I think they were really unaware of how lack of intention around shaping the culture affects everything. You know, um, culture is mostly affected by the top leaders around what they expect and what they allow. And I don't mean allow like in a legalistic sort of a way, but I mean if it says this is our mission and these are our values around excellence, faith, quality education, etc., then we expect everyone every day that they go to work to do that. And And that's what we expect. And the leadership of an organization has to talk about that all the time in new and different ways and not get tired of reminding people about those values and the mission. And what they allow, for example, if someone says something in a faculty meeting, which happened on more than one occasion, that really was disrespectful. I mean, I saw this happen and I was like taken aback. And so after some careful conversation and listening, the president of the institution went to those people and said, in private confidence, said, "What you're doing, how you're acting right now, can't ever happen again. I'm just telling you, you're violating the values and the beliefs of this organization." And those people were taken aback. I mean, senior level Christian PhDs, et cetera, you know? Um, and over time, things began to change for the better. Initially, there was a tremendous amount of like, you're gonna, oh, by the way, you asked a question about like, how do you actually do that? So I think there's three things that are mightily important. One is the leadership talks about their values all the time in a very uplifting, mission-driven way. Two, you do surveys, and we asked everyone who worked there to anonymously fill out a survey. Took them like 20 minutes, and those surveys, because they knew that they could speak openly, freely, identified 5 things that people felt were most. If we are willing to talk about these things honestly, we're gonna mend a lot of these hard feelings. We're gonna build the trust. We're gonna improve ourselves. We're gonna become more aligned with the values of the institution. So leadership talking about it, the survey, and lots of listening, not as a technique, but as a way to really let people come forward and say, "This is how I feel about this. I can do this without fear of repercussion, and then we're gonna do something about that." And it begins to build a container where the culture becomes more trusting, more transparent. People feel more free to speak without fear of retribution. I don't know why they had fear of retribution. There never was any, but that was the underlying current.
Well, there
So
was just not honest, authentic communication.
there wasn't, and in this, I won't mention who they were because some of the things that happened, it's not for public consumption, but there were some, like, for example, in one instance, some board members made comments about some faculty members that were disparaging. And that got back to the faculty members. And there wasn't an attempt for them to come together and to confession and make each other make whole in that situation. So if you're saying, okay, I'm in a company or I'm in a nonprofit and we have a pretty good culture, we think, well, you may be lucky. What if you have a boss who's like you, Chris, who doesn't even know what culture is, but you're positive, you're driven, you have character, you want to hire the best people, you tell your people over and over again about the importance of quality service and quality product that we have. So by accident, you're doing these things that need to be done. So if you're saying, I wasn't even aware of that, well, you're lucky. Most organizations don't have that. So if you're going to say, how do we like put something into place? I think that from my own experience of being in leadership and from consulting, I see 3 things really, really important. The leadership has to have alignment between their values and their behavior, and they need to talk about that and why that's so important.
Yeah. I think the thing that changed for our business was Danny Silk's book, Culture of Honor. I don't know if you've ever read that one. And so by exploring what it means to have a culture of honor in our business, where we not only honor ourselves, right? Honor each other, listen carefully, and then collectively honor our clients. It changes everything because then things like levels of excellence are just automatic, right? And so we have those conversations, which transforms a lot of stuff. So recently, I just heard about connection codes. Are you familiar with those guys? Connectioncodes.co. I'm going to be interviewing them. I think it's in a week or two. Great organization that talks about this wheel of all of these different feelings that you have, because your feelings are your feelings and they help you inside of 2 minutes. Like if you have any kind of disagreement with someone, you take 2 minutes, you go around the wheel, all of a sudden, poof, it's a beautiful thing. So I'm looking forward to that conversation and learning more about that. But it sounds like you intrinsically set space for that to occur when you're working with these organizations.
Yeah, I really like that. It's similar to some other things where you intentionally give space for people to just lay it out there.
Yes.
And it's not like you lay it out there so I can disagree with you. You lay it out there so I can really understand you. And then there's a higher level of respect. So on the I if could say what else happened in that seminary that helped, it was the alignment of the staff, of the leadership, their conversation, to talk ab their consistent conversations about that. There's a second side, which I would call it cohesion. It's like, we say we have your back, we're gonna show you we have your back. Even if we disagree, we're gonna create space for that, and we are gonna stay together, we are gonna be a team. And there were a couple of people that I was encouraging the president to let go, because I felt they were insubordinate, and they could have easily made that case, and she said, "I'm not ready to go there yet. I think this person actually, if they will turn around, they could become a really important part of the new culture by saying, 'I was on the outside and now I'm on the inside.'" And she was right, and I was wrong about that.
And what that
The
says to What that says to me is that a leader that has discernment, that can really listen in and hopefully see the bigger beauty inside of someone and give them space to get to that
Yeah,
place.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
amazing.
I think this was a person, in spite of how they had credentials and a PhD and all that stuff, I think they were really wounded on the inside for something else, and that was coming out, and that creates something. So there's alignment, there's cohesion, and then there's something called separation, which is not the opposite of these things. It's an implication, which is, well, if I'm fundraising for the seminary and I'm out in Montana, or I'm recruiting and I'm in Iowa City, my separation does not create a difference in my belief in the values and the mission, the importance of my work. So even when I'm alone out here, separated, I'm still completely rowing in the same direction. Or if I'm working remotely 3 out of 4 weeks a month, my separation, I'm not impacted. A friend of mine said that ethical behavior is like what you see in a person when no one's watching them work. And so that separation is equally as important. And over about a year, this doesn't happen like, it's like growing a garden. You can't just go out and go, "Grow faster." It takes time and effort, and over the course of about 12 to 18 months, there was a pretty remarkable shift. And let's go back to the numbers. Student evaluations went up, fundraising went up, recruitment numbers went up. The faculty's openness to bringing on new programs, in foreign languages to attract new students went up. So the numbers all changed that you could measure, but they wouldn't have changed without the culture shift because the trust wouldn't have been there.
And of course, my brain always goes to a quantum physical level. So I'm just looking at all of this transformational stuff and getting into alignment that actually shifts the atmosphere to change the culture, or not to change just the leadership, but it just oozes onto the rest
Yeah.
of the organization. Like,
Yeah.
so
And the
beautiful.
first couple months were I've been self-employed 17 years in my life. I probably worked with 300 organizations over those 17 years. That was the hardest consulting, uh, uh, duty that I ever had in my life. And when I got the contract initially, the voice in the back of my head was saying, "Say no, say no, say no." And then there was this other voice that was sort of like, "God's calling you to this for such a time as this." Old Testament scripture there.
Esther would
So,
love it. Mhm. Okay,
yeah.
so
Yes.
transition just a smidge. You talk about above the line versus below the line thinking. Okay, so for our listeners who haven't heard this framework before, break that down and how does do that, but also how does fear-based leadership keep organizations below the line, and what does it take to get them above it?
Great, great. So, um, we are all above and below the line at different times. It's in us. I think some people are more naturally led to be above the line than below the line. But here's the distinctions. below the line people tend to be more judgmental quickly, or above the line people tend to be more forgiving and accepting. Um, Below the line, more zero sum thinking, like there's only so many resources to go around versus having more of an like, wait a second, more of an abundant mindset. I see faults, I see possibilities, even in the failures. Um, I want to be right about this, even if I know I'm wrong, because I don't want to be vulnerable versus saying, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be curious. I'm okay with people seeing my dark side here. I'm going to cast blame versus I'm going to own my own share in this. And then your second question, so you can, it's very easy. It's very easy for people to go, oh, that's Susan, or oh, that's Fred. But wait a second. Oh, that's me. That's me. Okay. First and foremost, that's me. I possess all of that. And it starts with a high level of awareness to like, am I slipping below? Because when a group or an individual is below the line, they cannot find an innovative or creative space. A team will not find an innovative or creative space until they realize that they can shift their perspective. It's not about what's happening to you. It's about how you respond to that. For example, I was on a phone call a couple weeks ago with about 5 CEOs of universities and some consultants, and we kinda got a little grousy about, politics and grants and tariffs and all that sort of thing, and then one of them said, one of the things that I did with my board was we had a conversation that said, "What are the opportunities that exist today that never would have existed 1 year ago?" And that the whole conversation
Perfect
shifted,
question. So
you
perfect.
know?
Yeah.
So crafting the right kind of question can take you above the line versus if you just kinda, like, go after it like you're sitting around the coffee table with friends, it's real easy to grouse about things. So a real conscious effort to be like, "Wait a second, I need to ask a better question." Okay. So your second part was about fear-based behavior. So fear-based behavior being knowing that I need to leave myself open to taking risks. Hard to do sometimes. A fear-based environment, I believe that fear is a very powerful motivator, but takes you nowhere. Okay. And so if people are in a work environment or volunteer environment and they feel like they're being driven by fear, they might move, they might actually be motivated and attracted to that because there's something that can be, like, kinda magnetic about that, but then it eventually runs out of gas because you can't build a team or you can't build long-term solutions out of fear-based. So bosses who are like that, well, then they have to manufacture another thing to be fearful about 2 months down the road or whatever it happens to be, and so it also is, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to have to work or operate in an environment like that. So you either have to decide if, let's say, I was working in an environment like this, am I going to find a way outside to continually renew my spirit, or am I going to go somewhere else?
Yeah. That makes
So,
sense.
and not just stay there and be ground down, and every day I end up below the line
And
because then
being a
I'm,
victim, right? You don't wanna be a victim in a
yes,
situation like
absolutely,
that.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
I'm hard. I go home and I kick the dog instead
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
praying. So, yeah,
Own your
so that's.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so that fear-based versus, forgiveness and curiosity and risk-taking, just changes people, and our brain chemistry changes, like, immediately when we're in an environment like that. It's very, very, magnetic to be in the above the line environment and realize that, like, "Oh, I'm free to say what's on my mind here, even if they don't use my ideas." And so it's really freeing and can be really, really powerful.
Sounds good.
Oh, by the way, if people are curious about this, go to YouTube and search for location, location, location above the line. There's a company that has a handful of little, like 3 or 4-minute videos, and the video describes it with really cool graphics in a way that I
Nice.
couldn't. So, yeah, location, location, location.
I like it. All right, let's talk about your personal stewardship journey. How about it? All right. So, you and your wife, Kim, made a decision 25 years ago to start living on less of your income to increase your giving. Now, if that's not above the line thinking, I don't know what is. So now you're giving away 15 to 20% annually So walk me through that evaluation. What changed your perspective on generosity? Because that had to be such a huge shift for both of you.
It it was, because we both grew up relatively poor. I mean, we weren't, like, searching for food on the street, but definitely, you know, um, poorer, and I, uh, had this image, which is actually something that happened when I was a kid. My parents, on the 1st of the month, would sit at the kitchen table, open up the checkbook, have all the bills, and they would walk through that and say, "Are we going to tithe before we pay the bills?" And as a farmer, your income can fluctuate greatly based on grain prices and production of your corn and beans and cattle and all that sort of stuff. And so just have this vivid image of my mom and dad. They weren't arguing, but it was an intense conversation. And they were like, "We're going to give to the church first. We're going to give to that organization first, and God's going to take care of us." And my parents also, in spite of how hard they worked, they also volunteered and, volunteer firemen in the church and things like that. And they lived very metaphorically, they lived very open-handed versus closed-handed, close-fisted. And I was maybe married 5 years, 2 little kids. I had just become self-employed, and so I didn't have much income, and but we were like one of those, let's put a couple bucks in the plate every week, you know? And every time I did that, I just had this, like, something going, "You're not honoring scripture, you're not honoring your parents' faith and values and what you're called to do." And Kim and I talked about that, and we're like, we don't even know if it's gonna work, but we're gonna start doing it." And we did. And it was scary, but it was also so freeing. And I just started seeing example after example of how generosity just came back to people in amazing ways.
Every
And
time.
so we started tithing, and then maybe, so it was like 25 years ago, and then about 10 years ago. No, 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 it was more than that. It was probably 5 years after that. We said, let's not tithe, let's do 80-10-10." So we're gonna live on 80. We live pretty frugally, always. We're gonna invest 10, and we're gonna give away 10. And so one of my, like, biggest messages is, don't wait to start this, okay? The further down the trail you are right now, the less impact it has. The sooner you start, the greater impact that it will have in your life. And so when Kim retired 9 years ago, we just started looking at where we were with what we had invested and some pension and my continuing to work and all that. And we're like, we can give away a lot more than 10% and still be very comfortable and live a very, wonderful life. And so we did. And we had some really interesting, sometimes difficult conversations about how are we going to do that? Because we have kids and grandkids and we do want to do, something nice for them down the road. And we came to a really great agreement around this. And it's been wonderful to do increased giving and see the impact of that. It's not a bad thing for somebody to leave all their money in their estate to their kids and some charities or whatever, but it's also a wonderful thing to see it happening right now.
When
So
I first heard the story about the widow's mite,
Mhm.
and Jesus says to whoever was listening, she gave more than everyone else, and all she did was put in a bit. But in relationship to what she had, she gave so much. And that just went through me like a knife. And ever since I heard that story, I've been on this mission to grow my giving. So I can tell you that I am a clear witness that when you do that, your trust level in God just explodes. And so I am not where I need to be, but I'm probably at the 30-ish% place right now. And I actually want to get to 90. That might sound, it's fantastic. And so I can remember times because, I'm a business owner, my income fluctuates. And so there were times when I was writing those checks and I'm like, God, I'm doing this to honor you right now. But you know that if I do this, it's gonna kinda be interesting. So, I'm gonna do it anyway because I trust you. That increases your faith, and it gives him room to move on your behalf, and he did it
Yeah.
every time,
Every time. Every
every
time.
time.
The promises of God won't fail us. I grew up I mentioned my wife and I were both really modest homes. My parents were generous. Her parents, I love them dearly, okay? My father-in-law is still alive, 96 years old. Um, but they did not get the generosity bug. Great parents, good people, honorable, all that sort of thing. And just and so 2 things have happened because of that. I am always like, there's gonna be enough. There's always gonna be enough. And Kim still has that in her from her childhood. Will there be enough? And so when we look, I know there's gonna be enough, but so we'll look and she's like, "Oh yeah, there's gonna be enough. There's always enough." The second thing that's happened is her father, now at 96, my mother-in-law passed away a few years ago, because he's in a VA, facility, and he has some little bit of pension and a little bit of Social Security and that. He has more money in the bank now than he's ever had in his entire life, and he's now at 96 starting to give money away to different charities that he cares about, and he's having a blast.
Yeah.
And he, like, goes into tears. He's like, "I've never been able to do this before. This feels so great." And I'm like, "Tom, I wish you had started doing this 20 years ago."
Yeah. For people who are listening, this is so pivotal in your life. It
Yeah.
changes everything. So,
Oh,
yeah,
it's so
I'm
fun to
glad we
see.
got to this place. I didn't know we were gonna go
So
here.
fun to see. Well, my friend Dennis Gorski, had started a ministry a few years ago called Dynamis Ministries, Dynamite,
Mhm.
MG,
Mhm.
and it's about helping people of faith see how they can be more generous, and he said, "This is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. When you start working out, it's hard and it's painful,
Mhm.
but then once you get in shape, it's like, 'Oh, this is fun.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
feels great to be able to stretch like this.'" So, yeah.
All right. Let's talk leadership philosophy and business impact. You're
Okay.
coaching family businesses through generational transitions
Mhm.
right now.
Mhm.
What's the biggest challenge these wealthy families face when trying to align multiple generations around both business and values?
Yeah. By the way, your very first question was, "What's been most unexpected?" I never thought that I'd be working with family businesses that are trying to transition from the founder to the adult children, 40 years old, 50 years old. But what a interesting journey this is. I'm working with 3 organizations, right now. Uh, where basically all I do is I coach the founder. Okay. And once in a while, talking to, like workshop kinds of things. So the challenge is how these businesses were built on grit, determination, risk taking, learning how to build things, whether it's construction or manufacturing or investment or whatever it happens to be.
Oh, I can already feel it coming.
So,
Not to,
so,
but I can feel like the second generation doesn't know anything about that. Okay.
so they've only known a dad or parents who worked like crazy,
Yeah.
but they've always had like, instead of going to like Springfield for vacation, they've been going to Italy for vacation their whole lives. Okay. So, then, I mean, the research is just packed with how generation one built it and generation two like squirreled it away. Um, and so, but my experience is though, the second generation is now they're, like, grasping the weight of this, but they don't have it's like the founder's looking through the window from this direction, and they're looking through the window from this direction. So how do you pass on values, the business acumen, the grit, which you really can't pass on grit, it's you got it or you don't, we can develop it. So S s s and if they are doing it right or aren't doing it right, at some point, founder's gonna, like, say, "I'm leaving, I'm stepping away." So, how do they let go more quickly in a way that still equips the family? A quick metaphor. I have a friend who used to help plant immigrant churches all across Texas. And he used this image of, so let's say you're working with a Sudanese group of immigrants in Houston, and he says it's like I'm standing up and I'm grabbing their hand when they're down on the ground, and I'm helping them stand, and I'm helping them stand, and when they're fully standing, if I'm still holding firmly to their hand, I've done it wrong.
Because then you're telling them they're not strong enough to stand on their own.
Now it's about me. And so he said the paradox, if you will, is to know how to know when to start letting go. So by the time they're standing, I don't need to hold on to them at all anymore. I just need to like walk alongside and love them, you know? And this man, Mark Junkins was his name, absolutely an expert at this. So how that most founders don't think about that until they're like a year from wanting to leave.
I
They should
see.
be thinking about it 10 years before they're ready to leave, so they can start to impart values, strategy, business acumen, and so the
It's a
in one
parenting issue. That's what it really is.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and they probably weren't good parents. They probably were overly competitive, and made all the decisions for their kids growing up. So, there's actually um, a number of really good, like, playbooks, if you will, for what are the steps that you could it's not, like, all about technique, but it involves important conversations around imparting values and strategy and legal and things like that, so the founder can feel good about what they passed on to their children and then can step back and say, "This is yours now." It it's really a head scratcher, though. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, but I can also see space for some founders who did pour so much life and grit into the beginning of the business, may sometimes have not been there so much for family when they needed to be. And so there's that level of conversation that and healing that has to take place as well.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, I feel really fortunate that my son and I have a really good relationship, and, when he was 14, we talked about baseball and relationships and girls and things like that, and now he's 38, so we're talking about, like, should I buy the house or the townhouse or the the car or how do I deal with this issue with my 2 sons, you know? So the conversations need to grow up too,
Yeah,
and that's
truly.
pretty meaningful stuff, so
So my next question, you
yeah.
mentioned Richard Rohr's Falling Upward when we talked last time. The first half of life begins about building up, the second half about meaning making, right? So here you are, 68 years young. How has this philosophy shaped your current work? And why are you still working when you don't have to?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the second question is easier to answer than the first, which is, I'm still working because I, um, I feel that God is still calling me to use all of these experiences that I've had in a way. This is about my deep gladness and the world's deep hunger. I don't want to sound like hugely philosophical about this, but I have 3 grandkids, maybe 4 by the end of today, actually, Chris.
Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah, yeah, we're about ready to jump on a plane and go to Phoenix. But, a couple years from now, when my grandkids say, "Hey, grandpa, when that happened and when that happened, what did you do?" I don't wanna say, "Oh, I retired and sat on the sideline and watched it all happen." I wanna say, "Oh, I was in a position because of experience or relationships or faith or resources to like," and sometimes it's not even work. It's like, going and having coffee with a person, twice a month and listening to them and giving them business advice or leadership advice or asking them hard questions. So I've been put in a position where um I mentioned my friend Dennis Gorski, he said, "Brian," he goes, "I don't know that you know all that much." Jokingly, he said, "But you know a lot of people." And so your ability to have influence into those business and nonprofit leaders is really needed. Somewhere between I don't know the exact stats. I've read some different research. Between 65 and 75% of all nonprofit leaders will retire in the next 5 to 7
Oh
years.
my Lord.
And many of them are gonna retire early. So it's gonna
Ooh.
be a brain drain of experience,
Yeah.
and so all these people are moving up who have program experience or fundraising experience, but they don't have governance and fiduciary and recruiting and board experience. And so that's one of the things where I have the most experience, and it's super interesting to me. And my clients are having more effective outcomes than they've ever had. And I'm just, I don't want to pull out. I don't want to pull out of that world. That's just needed and it's meaningful,
And
fun.
it's fun. Yeah,
It
absolutely. You
is.
know you're in the your right spot when you're having fun. That's good.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned the Tender Lions book. This is the next one. It's called Igniting the Powder Keg, and it's about how to help your nonprofit board be more greatly engaged. And so this will be ready for publication in just a couple months. So Tender Lions was really about my family story, and this is about my professional life of working in the nonprofit
That's
world.
good.
So
Thanks for sharing that.
yeah, yeah, and that's fun.
So, what's the core problem you're solving in that book?
How do you help the new executive director? So let's take, we talked about uh, Linda Schuler from Housing Forward. Okay. She's a prime example. Go back 20 years before she was an executive director, and she was good at programming. She understood that world really well. Then she went into the CEO's office, and it was like, it's like an hourglass, sand in the top, the aperture, and the sand in the bottom. The CEO is with the aperture, and everything below is fundraising, staff, volunteers, people you serve. Above is the board of directors. The new CEO goes into that new job knowing the bottom, not knowing anything about the top. Governance, fiduciary responsibilities, they would be like, "What's a fiduciary?" How do you recruit new board members and build a deep bench? I've never done that before. How do you think about creating these relationships in the community with people who are connected and influential? Like, I never did that before. So, so we, and so on a micro level, we're going to need a whole bunch of new CEOs in the coming season. And on a macro level, all of those nonprofits deal with family, faith, homelessness, hunger, housing, health, mental health. So to equip it, and by the way, becoming an effective CEO is not like brain surgery. There's a handful of tasks and skills that if you can do effectively will help you build a stronger board. And so the board goes, so goes the organization. I was naive about that when I was early in my nonprofit career. I thought you could kind of like go around the board if they weren't very strong.
So, can I ask a
Go ahead.
question right there? So, if you have in the hourglass, I love that, all of the worker bees, right, doing the stuff. You got the CEO in the middle, and you've got the board at the top. Does the is it good to pull your CEO from the bottom? I would think that there's some benefit in doing that, simply because they really know the grit, to use your word from before, of the organization, and that just gives them such a tie to what's going on. They get it, and now they're just moving up, gaining some new skill and moving on. I mean, that's how I see Linda.
Uh-huh.
But can
Uh-huh.
it work without that?
Oh, yes, yes. There are examples. For example, I knew a man quite well who had only corporate experience, and he served on the board of High Point University, High Point, North Carolina. And their search just didn't turn up anybody that they were really excited about, and so they went to him on a interim basis and said, "Would you serve as interim president?" And when he got in there, they're like, "We want you." And it wasn't because he had business acumen, great business acumen, but he also understood out from a volunteer perspective, leadership, fundraising, community engagement, building respect in the community. he had those other things that he could pick up on and use really quickly.
But
So
he was
you
also on
don't.
the board, so he knew the organization.
Yes, yeah. So they don't have to come from the staff of the organization, although many times boards feel like they have to go find a superstar from afar versus looking in the organization and trying to build them up, getting them good coaching, getting them good mentoring, getting them good leadership experiences. So when they do need, a really important thing boards should think about is succession planning, even if they think their CEO is gonna be there for a long time. Have the process for what you will follow in place. So if they, God forbid, they get hit by a bus or they take a job somewhere else, they're ready to they'll go, "Oh, this is what we need to do to fill this position."
Yeah, I mean, because life can just occur out of nowhere, and you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah, and
"Oops."
you don't wanna be flat-footed when things like that happen. You know, that there 10 years ago, there was almost like a sense of certainty. This is how things are gonna work in the nonprofit and the corporate world, and we have this time to, like, set our 5-year strategic plan and work our goals, and now the goals need to be set around flexibility, and resilience,
Yeah.
and uncertainty, and
Mhm.
responsiveness,
Yeah,
and so there's a different mindset. That's all above the line.
yeah. Look, I'm looking at the time, so I'm a little concerned about moving ahead a little bit. So, can we touch on Tender Lions? You and your son Jeff wrote this together after your own family went through some challenging times. What made you decide your story could help other fathers and sons?
Yeah. So, for the audience who doesn't know this, 25 years ago, I was a really dysfunctional dad. I'm a recovering addict, and grateful for that. Um, so I've really wrecked my family for a while, and by the grace of God and a lot of hard work, we're in a good place with my wife and I, and my kids, and now grandkids. And yeah, absolutely. And about 10 years ago, he was late 20s, I just started thinking maybe our story, if we're willing to, like, tell this in a sensitive way, could be helpful to other families. I was seeing more and more and more from my work at the foundation, how the effects of dads who didn't have an emotional connection with their kids dramatically impacted the health of the kids, even if they lived in the house. So, and then our story and that research really wove together to form Tender Lions. So, it's interesting, image of tender and lions, of how can a man be a man in today's society? And so Jeff, was like, "Okay, let's take this on," and so we wrote Tender Lions, published about 5 years ago, and, it tells our family story, but also a lot of other, um advice from other experts around how do you build a stronger core in the family around being willing to reach out beyond your own family to get help, um, being able to manage your own uncertainty or fear or anger towards a spirit of humility, um, and being honest. And without being honest, looking at your down in your shadow, the dad is the one that needs to own that. Don't expect your kids to fix your family, you know? So, by the grace of God, I found the strength to get honest about my problems and brought those to my family, so it's a powerful story around, how our family was a wreck and how that got rebuilt, and now the work that Jeff and I have with, men's groups and family groups and, um, speaking at conferences and doing media
So
things and that sort
good.
of. Yeah, yeah, it's incredibly meaningful.
When we talked about this before today, you had mentioned that when fathers don't have that strong emotional connection, you think that the boys suffer more than the girls. You know, witnessed by higher rates of violence, although I've seen some pretty violent women too, gangs, suicide. Did you discover anything because of your own family's healing journey that's applicable to current organizations and how they work in the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing that in, important ways and sometimes very negative ways, in the workplace today, in that, there's a lot of men who are resisting education. They're feeling more hopeless. There's more young men who live in their parents' basement than ever before in American society who, play video games and eat Cheetos or whatever, and their parents are like, they let them there and they don't like kick them out and tell them to go get a job. And so that affects the man's ability, willingness to have grit to really try to thrive. And women are much more relational. And so and the college, you look at who's signing up for colleges, when I was a kid, way more men than women went to college. Now it's absolutely reversed. And I think men feel threatened by really a man who's not secure in his image. That's a whole nother conversation around, am I imago Dei? Am I made in the image and likeness of God? So my value doesn't come from how much I make or my college degree. It comes because God said you're in my family, and I'm not ever letting you out of my family. And so, but society says, No, 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 you're successful if you work hard and make a lot of money and live in the right zip code," which is all a bunch of BS, you know? And so women are, um, uh, becoming, more successful in the workplace, higher incomes, more independence, and they don't necessarily wanna have relationships with guys that don't respect that and wanna have that as their relationship, and that's damaging, can be damaging in the church, can be damaging in the workforce where you have men where they used to, like, be in charge, sometimes too much in charge, okay, too dominating, where they're just being passive, and they're not plugging in the right way. That's that tender lions thing. Know when to be tender, know when to be the lion, know when to be strong, know when to be soft, know when to be, authentic and assertive, and know when to say, "This isn't the time for that." Because we need to be both
We
and
we
have the
do.
sensitivity.
We do. We need to
Yeah.
really listen, lean in and listen to what Holy Spirit is saying. Have you, Charlie Kirk recently died, and I listened to his wife in the memorial. Did you happen to listen to what she said?
I started listening to the memorial 2 nights ago, and it's like 4 hours, 5
Well,
hours long. I didn't
y-
get I
when
didn't
you
get through it.
when
I
I
will listen to
yeah,
it.
when I got to her,
Mhm.
I heard someone who had a relationship with Charlie that was based on each of them giving more than 100%. And just really honoring each other in such a way that made them so powerful. And it wasn't a question of, well, you're the guy, you have to go do this stuff, or I'm the woman I have. No, there was, yes, they did that, but they did it in such a way that it was empowering one another and honoring one another. That was one of my big takeaways. The other takeaway from it was, because they were so close and so willing to pour into each other, she can now step into that place and not really miss a beat because she knew him so well. There's a lot of meat and potatoes in her speech that I hope everyone takes a listen to. Yeah, and that's what you're
Mhm.
reminding me of when you talk
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, yeah. I am where I am today, not because I'm such a cool guy. I am where I am today because of the grace of God and that healing power of the Holy Spirit in my life. I said a dysfunctional dad, and what I poured on my family, no one should have to endure that. And because of my wife's patience and, sometimes anger, righteous anger, and forgiveness, we are in such a much better place. I wouldn't wish my life on anybody or want to go do that again, but because we were willing to take all the dark stuff and bring it into the light, I mean, finally, what I was hiding in my addiction, etcetera, when I finally looked at that, God said, "Hey, I've been hiding in this dark place waiting for you to come uncover me all this time." So now, as you mentioned 2 halves of life here, Richard Rohr, the second half of life is not realizing that it just keeps getting better and better and better and better, but that it continues to be a roller coaster, and life is lived in all of that, in the good and the bad, and you embrace all the gray stuff.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
for somebody who's struggling with organizational culture issues, right, family business transitions, or even personal stewardship questions, Brian, what's the first step they should take?
Well, they need to stop because they've realized that trajectory isn't taking them where they want it to go. And so if they just, like, put their head down, they're gonna it's like as if your car's gonna run off in the ditch and you don't turn the wheel, you're just gonna, like, keep going in the ditch. It's so you have to somehow find a truth in that, a perspective in that, and oftentimes, you can't do it on your own. And so a good friend, a pastor, a counselor, a coach, you've gotta get new thinking and be humble enough to say, I own this, and if I'm going to make it better, I have to start now. It's never too late to take the first step in a different direction.
Oh, say
Never
that
too late.
again. That is so true.
It's never too late to take the first step in a different direction. Never too late. Whether it's finances, marriage, addiction, anger, whatever it happens to be, you know, the man or woman who has too much pride to admit that, they'll never find their second half of life.
It's good. You're right.
They'll be 80 years old, and they'll still be the same emotionally immature person they were when they
Yeah.
were 20.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great, great wisdom. Thank you for that.
And I don't always live that out, by the way. I know I sound like
Oh, you're
I'm, you
not
know, if
perfect.
oh, no, if Kim were here right now, she'd be like, "Amen, listen to that."
Actually, I can't wait to meet Kim one of these days. She sounds amazing. Because really, the secret sauce that Kim had was forgiveness, and it
Mhm,
changes everything. So,
mhm.
yeah.
So let me add to that, that was when that phrase, "It takes a village," was becoming popular, and I kinda poo-pooed that phrase until I needed the village. Kim needed the village, and it was her group of Christian friends that really surrounded her with care and listening and prayer and tears at times. When she didn't have, like, the strength to want to stay in the marriage, they were like, "It's too soon to make that kind of a decision." And so I thank God for them for giving that type of, um, just real wonderful, loving support, and um, eventually I mean, eventually the forgiveness came, and that changed everything. You know, forgiveness isn't, um I know you're trying to wrap this up, but forgiveness really wasn't for me, even as much as I wanted to be forgiven. The forgiveness set her free.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Forgiveness set her free because she came to me and said, "Oh, I can see you're going to your recovery meetings and you're going to counseling, and the relationship with the kids is getting better." And she goes, "And I'm happy for you, and I'm glad that that's happening." She said, "But I'm stuck. I thought that my lack of forgiveness, I could, like, get back at you." And she goes, "What I realized was it just started making me more bitter." And she said, "I need to do this for me so I can move forward." And that was, everything.
So this conversation with Brian reminds us that whatever we're talking about, family relationships, organizational culture, or personal stewardship, the real transformation happens when we move beyond the surface numbers to address what's really driving behavior and results. And I would say also right there, really leaning in to see what does God say about all this fun stuff. And if Brian's insights into organizational culture, family business transitions, or stewardship planning resonates with you at all, I encourage you to reach out to him. And you can connect with Brian Becker at Leader's Edge. And we'll have his confirmation in the show notes, of course. And whether you're a nonprofit leader struggling with board man engagement, or a family business owner planning succession, someone wanting to explore more intentional financial stewardship, Brian brings both the expertise and the heart level wisdom to help you move forward. So, and if you'd like to explore how these principles might even impact your own financial planning and life goals, well, I sure would like to talk to you as well. Sometimes the most important conversations happen beyond the numbers, which is why I have tons of tissue in my office. And they happen when we get honest about our values, our fears, and our deepest motivations. So reach out for introductory conversations and let's see what's possible as we move beyond the numbers. And thank you so much for being my guest today, Brian. And I look forward to that cup of coffee one of these days soon. Be blessed, my friend. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks so much for the conversation. God bless you.
See you all next time on Beyond the Numbers.
Beyond the Numbers podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.